when I was traveling, I actually used Craigslist a lot. I don't think you should anymore. I also was kind of a last minute person. Like I would drive to a city not knowing where I was going to live and kind of get there and find a place when I got there. And I always found a place. Hello and welcome to the Nomadicare Show. Today we get to talk all about housing, one of the hardest parts of becoming a travel therapist. So Jacob, what is the question exactly?
Oh, the question is, how do I do it? Right? It's so tough. There's so many different variations of the question. How do I find housing in this place? How do I know if I'm not getting scammed? Where do I look for? What are the websites? So it's a very big, jumbled question. Housing is almost like one of those unsolvable problems, but one that 100% of people have to figure out, right?
Yeah. Yep, perfect. Okay, so let's talk about first, we'll just do the basics of housing for this episode. So number one, the timeline. When do you find housing? So you're going to find housing for your assignment after you sign the contract, essentially. You don't want to find housing first. However, some people you'll hear say, don't sign the contract until you find housing. And I think where that advice is good is you can look on the websites and make sure there's going to be something viable. There, if you look and there's like zero housing on all of the websites, then you might need to talk to your recruiter before you sign the contract on, can you reach out to the facility and ask if they know about housing? Where am I going to live during this contract if there's nothing on any of these websites first? So you can kind of glance around and say, all right, I can probably find housing here, and then sign the contract. You don't necessarily need to secure housing first, because before you sign that contract, the facility could change their mind and go with someone else. So sign the contract and then say, all right, it's time to find housing. From there, I guess, what do you say? You know a lot of the websites. What is the website you would say is a great one for travelers to use for housing?
Yeah, I think the most popular one out there is a website called furnishfinders.com because they specialize in short-term furnished rentals, which is exactly what you want as a traveler. You don't want to move with a bunch of couches and TVs and everything like that. And you also don't want to sign a 1-year lease at a typical apartment building, right? So you want something that's like a 3-month lease that the furniture and towels and everything are already in there. So Furnish Finders is a great place to find that. Other popular places are Facebook groups. So there are dozens of travel, healthcare, housing, or travel nurse housing Facebook groups. Even if it says nurse in there and you're a therapist, same thing, right? They just are looking for the biggest keyword that they can get. And so Facebook groups are great. People can post, hey, I'm in search of housing for, Austin, Texas during this time. I need a 2-bedroom that's pet friendly. And then there's, landlords or, whatever the right term is for someone who is renting out their place will respond to you and say, hey, I have this, or vice versa. They will post saying, hey, I have a place that's available. And then a traveler will say, hey, is it still available? Can we talk? Can I get this place? So Facebook groups are great. And then, lastly, there's sites like Airbnb, VRBO, which are always more expensive than Furnish Finders or Facebook groups or anything like that. And you never want to pay the list price for whatever you see on there. You want to message the host and say, hey, I'm a travel therapist, travel sonographer, whatever you are. I want to stay here for an extended amount of time, 3 months. And, is there a discount available? And majority of the time, that person will give you a discount to lock you in for a long-term thing, so they don't have to pay don't have to try to book, a dozen people over 3 months. They'll just book one person over 3 months and kind of lock in that guaranteed revenue for them, or, highly guaranteed revenue. So those are probably your real core stuff. There's also tips and strategies of when you go into a place and say you're having a difficult time finding housing, or maybe the rental isn't available until maybe a week after your assignment starts. What's very common is travelers will go to places like Extended Stay America, or these kind of dine-in hotels. Is that what you would call it? Where you pay a higher per night fee, but you can get something really quick, and that's a great in-between, kind of like a Band-Aid if you had to wait or continue your search after your start date. So those are probably the most common ones. And then there's a slew of roommatefinder.com or, apartment Lee.com, random sites that typically don't work in my experience. Like they are just aggregating rentals from other websites, and they don't really have great supply and demand of like people want to rent out their place and people searching for it. And then like, of course, Craigslist is still out there, but a big problem in this industry is scams and knowing if the person that you're renting from is the actual person. Does a rental exist? Are they going to try to ask you for a big deposit and then ghost you, and then you'll never know who they are? So, we can talk about that, but that's where websites like Furnish Finders, Airbnb, and some of these Facebook groups, you can get a better scope of the person that you're renting from is a real person. You're not going to get scammed.
Yeah, and I would say on the scam note, I would not say because they're on a Facebook group or Furnish Finders or maybe Airbnb is a little bit better because I think they have like actual like prevention.
Identity
They'll
stuff.
pay you back if it's like through that. But these other ones, they're more like a marketplace that connects two people together. And if something goes wrong, they're not liable at all. They're not going to come in and pay back your deposit or anything like that. So I'd say no matter what, always assume it's a scam. Kind of like you can go into it and be like, okay, if this was a scam, like how would I protect myself? So you're like, you can do things where, you do the walkthrough and they have to be like on FaceTime with you. So you actually see the place and stuff like that, not just pictures. You can do the reverse image search. So on Google Google on a website, you can double click and it can say like search Google images, reverse search images, whatever that's called.
Yeah.
And it'll show you if that picture is multiple places on the internet. And a lot of times the scammers just use pictures they found on the internet to pretend like it's a house. And you don't want to send too much money up front. I think when I was traveling, I actually used Craigslist a lot. I don't think you should anymore, but I think back then it was like a little bit safer. And then I also was kind of a last minute person. Like I would drive to a city not knowing where I was going to live and kind of get there and find a place when I got there. And I always found a place, sometimes it was random ways that I found it, but I always ended up finding a place. Sometimes the place was not furnished. I know travelers who travel with like blow up mattresses and like they're very, very minimalistic and they travel with or like those ones that you camp with, that you can unroll and sleep on the floor. But I know people who travel and don't get furnished places because it's so much easier to find places that are not furnished.
Yeah.
And then
I've seen it too. Like housing gets a lot easier when your, for lack of a better word, like standards or requirements are lower, right?
Lower,
if you're going and you're like, hey, I want to live in like this bougie kind of apartment in this great location and do this, and I want this amazing kitchen with all the big windows, like you kind of got to prioritize what you're doing, right? Like, do you want to go and like live in a really cool place for 13 weeks, or do you want to go travel to a different place and make more money in a travel assignment and grow your clinical skills and be in a place where you can adventure out on the weekend? What are you looking for? Housing gets a lot easier when your
standard goes down.
And when you broaden your options. If you're like, hey, my apartment doesn't really matter because I'm going to be working 40 hours a week. And then when I'm not working 40 hours a week, I'm going to be outside. I'm going to be meeting people, hiking, going to museums, whatever you want to do, right?
Yeah,
so
it's total priority. And if you're willing to have a roommate, oh my gosh, you save so much money. And I know I used to...
rent a room in someone's house.
That's what I mean. Well, I guess that's what I mean.
Yeah, I guess you can
you live with another human, right? Like
True.
In the house. However, which way you do it, you save so much money. And then that is a much easier way to end up with a furnished place. If you're renting a room in someone's house, than getting a place all to yourself that's furnished just for you. So that is a great option.
Right now Airbnb ironically is making a big push. Airbnb originally started just renting rooms in people's places, not renting their entire house or their entire apartment. So they're making a big push. They literally call it Airbnb rooms. To get more people to rent rooms instead of whole places, because it just broadens up the whole scope, right? You don't have one person doesn't have to take up a whole house. You could have multiple people in a house.
Yeah.
So if you're down for that, I mean, and sometimes I think the average price is like $50 a night or something like that. So that turns out to a pretty attractive monthly rent.
Yeah.
And where you can still kind of pocket a good portion of your housing stipend,
Yes.
which is tax-free money.
Yes.
So you don't have to spend it on some luxury
Totally.
apartment.
And it is just about priorities. Like sometimes travelers will say, oh, there's no housing available that's affordable. I need, the bill rate needs to go up. But then when you actually dive in and look, there's lots that are actually affordable. It's just to their standard. They're like, I'm going to be spending way too much of my bill rate on this. And you're like, well, yeah, because you want like the primo.
The luxury apartment with the dog wash and, a retail spot on the bottom floor.
Yeah, those really nice ones. So I don't know. So you can figure out your priorities. But I think the big things of like more like logistical travel important. If your contract's canceled, you signed a 3-month lease, you need to make sure there's some way to get out of it in case your contract gets canceled. So you always want to have a caveat in there that says, if my contract's canceled, maybe there's a penalty fee that you have to pay. Maybe there's a notice you have to give, but you don't want to be locked into a 3-month lease that just says you have to pay it out no matter what.
Yeah.
Because you will have to pay it out no matter what. And nobody else has to pay it but you. The facility won't pay for that. The staffing agency won't pay for that. You're liable for whatever you sign. So be careful signing contracts that lock you in too hard in case of cancellation. And then just be careful about scams and potentially be willing to be creative in your housing to find a way to make more money and still enjoy the space. Because I think there's lots of ways to find housing if you open up your mind to what
100%.
you will sleep on at night. All right. Thank you for watching this episode. If you liked it, please like and subscribe so you'll know when we have more episodes come up. And if you need a recruiter to help you along on this journey, or you want to browse jobs and look at what different areas are paying, go to Nomadicare.com. We are the recruiter matchmakers, so we can match you to a vetted recruiter who's going to pay you fair and be awesome. Or you can also look at the jobs and see dozens of different staffing agencies post their jobs and their pay packages on one place to save you time. And we will see you at the next episode.
Adios.
Bye.
Never been here before, but I feel like I'm home. Yeah. Put my feet on the road, meet me over the coast. We got places to